Hello, and welcome to Public Health in Real Life, a channel dedicated to educating people on public health topics, educating the next generation, as well as um, highlighting unsung heroes in the area of public health and health technology. So, today we have an exciting interview on preventive healthcare and disease management with wearables. And if we look at wearables, let me also bring in my co-host to the show, Chris Radinam. Hi,
Hi,
Chris,
Ashwin.
to the show. So we look at about the wearables technologies. The industry is booming and is widely used. We also saw the advent of Apple 14 coming out, and there's a lot of interest among the consumers and patients in adopting and uh, using wearables more widely in the healthcare space as well. And wearables are applicable not only in healthcare but also decentralized elements in clinical research and health and wellness as well. And wearable devices market size is expected to reach more than $60 billion by 2026, accelerating at a compound rate of about 14%. So, how do you see this exponential growth?
Thank you, Ashwin. Yes, as you said, the field of wearables has evidenced dramatic growth in the recent years. There are two major reasons for this. One is the advancement in science and technology, and the other is awareness on health and wellness. Advancement in high performance computing for data processing, cloud computing for data storage, and emerging technologies for data processing are added advantages to harnessing the power of wearables. Over 13,000 patents were filed on wearables in the United States in the past few years. So, this is really astonishing. So, this is awesome.
Absolutely, and wearables are used in the detection of several physiological parameters such as heart rate, respiratory rate, skin temperature, chemical parameters. And if we look at especially diabetes management, you have multiple sensors, multiple wearables that are able to detect glucose levels in the body real time and and, kind of alert the patients on a time to time basis. And those have had a huge impact in public health and ensuring, uh, uh, you know, not only it's about the preventive healthcare, also heading towards personalized medicine as well. And today we're going to talk with Shalini Prasad and Dr. Sriram Muthukumar from N License LLC. So let us bring them on board here.
Hi,
Thank you.
Shalini.
Hello, Shalini and Sriram. Welcome to the
Hel-
program.
Hello, Ashwin and Chris. Thank you. Thank you for having us both here. We're excited.
Thank you. Thank
Likewise,
you.
excited to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Shalini and Sriram are developing wearables that track biomarker expressions via sweat and other proteins as well within multiple bodily fluids. They have performed detailed correlations of multiple biomarkers, including sweat glucose, cortisol, cytokine, and chemokine levels measured using sweat sensor to those found in plasma serum of the wearer. So they're going to talk to us about challenges and the opportunities around wearables today and how it has great promise for preventive healthcare as well as personalized medicines. So again, we are excited to have you on our show, Shalini and Sriram, and talk to us first about N license. Tell us how you got started and a little bit about yourself as well.
So, I thank you. I am a material scientist and a semiconductor device physicist by training, and I have worked in the semiconductor device industry for a long time. And I got introduced to Shalini in the last decade, and she had a problem when she was looking at characterizing different biosensing use cases. and we basically collaborated to develop this innovative sensor stack, which over our experiments, and she was running a lot of scientific experiments in a lab, and we found out that it can actually do ultra sensitive detection of chemical biomarkers in multiple body fluids. And all of this actually led to that formation of Enlicense. Enlicense was formed in 2014, and over this last 7 years, we have de-risked the science and technology of this sensor stack. And we are right now doing product development to look at application of this sensor technology into solving multiple disease conditions. We are focusing on chronic disease conditions, and also after the pandemic and the post pandemic, there is a increasing focus on the need for mental health
Yeah.
and stress management. And when we look at stress, we're not just looking at physiological stress, we are also looking at a hidden stress that is manifesting at a sublime level that can eventually lead to a lot of chronic health conditions and lead to increasing burden on the healthcare system. And so all of this is what we see our technology, that is the Enlicense core technology, using the sensor stack, can address and close these gaps. And that is how our Enlicense was formed, and that is our vision and our goal. Shalini?
So very briefly, just to add to that, right? So I am a bioengineer, and so I've been always looking at host response systems to study host response in a way that will allow humans to basically have a better quality of life. So it initially started with infection tracking, but then we started focusing more on chronic inflammation, because inflammation is, especially chronic inflammation, has a lot of downstream effects and impact, right? So that's what we started looking towards, of course, now understanding its final impact back on lifestyle, and looking at it more globally. So it is not just we are focused on looking at it at a certain select group or a geographical region. How can you make this work? Essentially, when you have to deal with 8 billion people, and most of whom don't live in North America. So that's who we are.
Let me congratulate you for your cutting edge research. This is really interesting. So, as Sriram said, that's true. There are several reports on on the relevance of post-COVID complication with the central nervous system. So that's very important to focus on the biomarkers related to neurological diseases. A follow-up question on that, Sriram. So you are focusing on a wide range of biomarkers, a wide range of infection, and as Shalini said, you're focusing on the infections not confined to the United States but also to several other countries. So my question is, what are your current priorities for your team? And with growing concerns about mental health post-pandemic globally, what do you plan to expand your product portfolio?
Absolutely. So, with mental health, our focus here is to look at accurate detection of that uh, the stress state and the cause of that stress that is leading to that mental health condition. So today, when we look at the wearables market that are all targeting around the stress-based monitoring, they are looking at surrogate markers or surrogate methods of tracking stress. Nothing wrong with that, but it's only one part of the solution to that problem. Our approach here, and which is complements with all these other providers in the market space, is to go look at the chemical biomarker expression related to mental health. So here is where we found, and we have actually shown with rigorous science, that our sensor technology can robustly characterize the level of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, in the body through the expression in sweat. We have done analytical correlation to show how it is accurate to the other standard of care. Where we want to go forward with this is to develop a product and actually develop an app-based infrastructure with our sensor ecosystem to track and monitor the levels of cortisol, and then use this cortisol levels to translate that data into tracking or monitoring one's mental health. And our ultimate goal here is to connect the patient and the clinician or the caregiver or the care provider. Now, mental health can affect in several different ways. There is the mental health in terms of anxiety that can lead to disorder, anxiety disorder. There is that chronic depression, which can be low grade or pretty severe. And there can also be a disease-based stress. Like if you are affected by chronic disease and it can lead to embarrassment, you don't want to talk about it. It can also lead to that stress state. And all this macroeconomic situations and this other thing can just pile on. And you may want, and today's most of the mental health type of products are geared towards happy face, sad face, or a mood expression or a mood tracking type of thing. People use sleep monitoring, the quality of sleep. People use the heart rate variability to also translate and algorithmically correlate to the stress state. Our focus here is go after the stress hormone, measure the stress hormone, and then translate the stress hormone into a stress state that can actually be your sublime or your subconscious state of being. We want to start with cortisol. We have also seen that our sensor can also track neuropeptides, which is the brain markers. And eventually we want to start with our first product that we want to do is called Corti Sense. And we want to basically launch this product in the next year or so. And we want to get this, and this will be a cortisol measuring product. We want to get the analytics. We want to be able to relate, make the effect on this thing, and eventually branch out to add other brain markers such as neuropeptide. And eventually this leads to inflammation. So we want to connect that whole thing to inflammatory markers such as interleukins and C-reactive protein and so on. So this is our vision. Our first product that we want to do is with cortisol monitoring.
Thanks, Sriram. And you really touched on 2 points here: the cortisol levels for mental health, and then inflammatory markers as well. And if we take a step back and we look at the history of health, right, we see that vaccine, right, the vaccine technology has had a huge impact on communicative diseases. Now we are in an age where we're going to the non-communicable diseases, and wearables seem to be the equivalent of vaccines, where it prevents and helps. We are just using technology in a better way to uh, go towards preventive healthcare. Do you agree with this kind of statement, Shalini? And uh, how do
Sure.
you see the next few years in terms of license or the world itself with wearables? Uh, we are not hearing you, Shalini. Sorry about it.
So, all right. That's a good analogy that you have taken, Ashwin. And it is true, right? Wearables can truly be the check engine light for our body, just as vaccines then do have preventative and bettering outcomes, right, for humans and in diseases. So, the way it is that truly, if you are in an environment outside of what you normally are, studies have shown that people tend to respond differently. The best example is look at your blood pressure. You go to a doctor's office and you take a reading. It is more often than not for most people higher than what you might get at home. And so, and just making a decision in terms of what is given to the patient based on that one high blood pressure reading is going to have adverse effects, right? So similarly, when you think about chronic diseases, now chronic diseases primarily tend to chronic inflammation, and inflammations are in the sense the check engine light for the disease. So by tracking these in real time and in a continuous manner, in a way that it is very non-intrusive, just as we are so used to checking our smart watches and seeing how many steps we have taken, are we hitting our goals, the same way, if we can see how our inflammatory state looks like at this point of time, and then it gives the patient the enablement enablement, right, to have actionable data so that they can have meaningful conversations with their physicians. Especially now, we are trending towards telehealth and telemedicine in the global scheme of things, because we are never going to have enough number of healthcare providers for the 8 billion people in this world. So the face to face interaction is not going to happen quite as much. Patient stratification has to happen, especially in low income communities and communities where access are challenging, right? So this is the challenge we have to solve. And this is where wearables can be the key enabler, especially for chronic diseases and then for their real time management. Because the downstream effects of inflammation are things like inflammatory bowel disease, our rheumatoid arthritis, our lupus, even diabetes, and eventually cancers. And of course, all of that plays back into our stress and lifestyle. So the ability to bring these things together, wearables truly are the enabler to do that. And we are hoping that our contribution with our sweat sensing capability is one such advancement that will truly drive the field of public health.
That's awesome. Chris, I believe you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Shalini. This is really very interesting. Yeah, you're right. As you said, wearables will have a great role and impact on the use of telemedicine. Yeah, follow up on that is specificity and sensitivity of the biomarkers are key challenge for developing biomarkers. So especially when we are considering patient safety. So how do you ensure sensitivity and selectivity for your products?
So it is there is this idea about the chemistry. The chemistry truly drives the outcomes in all cases. So a lot of effort we've put in terms of the analytical performance of the wearable. So the challenge, of course, is what are the ranges of these biomarkers? We all understand that no biomarker by itself is a true reporting of any given disease. So unlike, say, a troponin, which we all know, if you see an elevated troponin measure, we are tracking the cardiac muscles weakening, and so it's a heart attack that you're looking at. Unlike that, you don't have such a great marker for most things with chronic inflammation. So the challenge is always multifold. You have to detect many things in an assay format or in a multiplex format. And you have to figure out a combination of this that will truly give you that risk score that you're after, that will allow you to do prognostic tracking. So to do this, more often than not, there are a combination of inflammatory. So the messaging signals, which are your interleukins that we alluded to earlier, generally express themselves in really low concentrations. These are in the picogram, 10 to the negative 12. Then you're looking at things like C-reactive protein, and they're about 1,000 times more abundant, or even more, depending on where in the inflammatory state the human being is in. So, but then the challenge today in any lab analytical measure is that you will have to run two different assays to actually measure these out and eventually take that data, and you might be running it on different lab analyzers with different vendors. And so the physician then, or the clinician, has to make a true assessment based on this information. How do we get rid of all of this, right? So if we can integrate these multi-marker capability where a high expression profile and low expression profile can be integrated together on the same platform, right? This is what we have demonstrated. And we have demonstrated it in our human subject studies, and we have tracked this over time with people in different kinds of settings, right? So then we are able to understand whether we are able to track a falling space of inflammation or a rising phase of inflammation. Same thing applies to looking for stress. So how is perhaps the cortisol monitoring changing, or cortisol changing your expression based on maybe you had bad sleep the previous day, maybe the person consumed some alcohol, or they had some jet lag coming in. So all of this is now truly feasible by through that analytical grade. But ultimately, in the context forward looking for regulation, we have to determine the effect size that we're after, for which effect we're trying to design the wearable for. Is it for us understanding whether our lifestyle in terms of a better sleep pattern, then what is that looking like? Versus are we trying to study it in the context for inflammatory bowel disease, where again, it matters whether you're capturing the various deleterious effects of a falling phase of perhaps a flaring symptom. So this is the challenge in terms of putting that into the wearable. And we've, in the last 7 years, made significant progress so that today we are able to hand it out to people in many of our clinical studies that we are doing.
Thank you, Shalini. And if you look at it, it needs depth understanding of biochemistry, engineering, biophysiology, medicine, and talking about the elephant in the room, the FDA and other regulatory bodies. So I'm imagining there's probably you have to educate them a lot about how the wearables technology is actually going to be a value add to health. And more importantly, one other agency usually left out is the agencies like CMS, right? There's going to be, because of wearables, healthcare costs are actually going to go down because you're heading towards preventive healthcare. But can you first touch a little bit on challenges with regulatory bodies around the world in implementing wearable technologies, and then go to um, socializing this technology with bodies like CMS, Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, who actually pay the healthcare bills for the nation? Sorry for the loaded question, but I think you're on mute, Shani. I think you're.
Okay, yeah, right.
No.
So it's very important when you collect data in the context of when you design the clinical trial for a regulatory approval. It is very
Mhm.
important, again, what that effect size we're looking at. That's the first thing. The second thing is, are we truly covering the population demographics that we are after, right? More often
Yeah.
than not, then the disease indication is critical. So I'll take the example of IBD, the inflammatory bowel disease. So this is very prevalent at about 5 to 7% when you look at, say, the US and Europe. And then it is very much biased towards, if you will, the Caucasian population.
Right.
However, you have a significant upregulation of this in essentially the African American population too, which is recently happening. And more recently, within 1% of this, we're starting to see in Asian populations. So when
Mhm.
you design studies like this, the efficacy of the technology as well as the data that you're collecting, you have to demonstrate both efficacy and safety to the patient in the context of
Right.
a regulatory submission. So, and then the question is this now a de novo, or do you have then something as a predicate? Now, the obvious predicate in a wearable is going to be the continuous glucose monitoring. However, the kind of effects they're looking for, which is a well known indicator, right? Blood glucose through perhaps an interstitial fluid, is very well understood from a metabolism standpoint. However, for diseases which are driven by chronic inflammation or driven by stress traits, it is not an obvious connection. That's why we take the step back and we look at this as a decision support tool. So, if this is a
Right.
decision support tool, then how are we helping both the physician as well as the patient make a decision? So, and what is that decision? So, is it for a therapeutic intervention, or is the decision more about future diagnosis? So, which is more conclusive diagnosis. And more likely, it will be the latter at which you would start the regulatory. Framework of this, because then the effect size is going to be at a manageable number, which you can then distribute it as a multi-site study, and which is where we are doing right now all the assessments for, so that the data that you're getting then demonstrates the effect you're after. It gets more challenging when you're looking for more generalized indication, such as stress, right? Because the trigger points, the inputs that drive that out that outcome is going to be far more complex. So in that
Yes.
context, right, so how are you going to, this then ties back to the question you asked me about CMS, right? Because when it is prescribed in that context for a monitoring purpose, you have to have a very clear endpoint, which is when insurance starts to reimburse you to doing this. So we see that opportunity cost, which is why the focus has been in the context of the IBD framework, where it is very clear that patient themselves are advocates for having the ability to have monitoring, and where we are doing decision support. It is going to be a little less clear in a very regulated standpoint for stress. However, it allows you to do it in a non regulated environment, the demonstration of lifestyle monitoring, which is also the aspect of why we have very carefully selected going after these two to demonstrate indications. Once we have established this, then it is clear and easier pathway for us from a regulation to extrapolate it to other diseases where this then becomes the predicate and you're doing modifications. Not to say it's going to be much cheaper, but definitely you have established then a framework to looking at this. This has been the challenge in wearables. You've seen they've been around for 12 years, and then there's been a lot of excitement. But more often than not, they're just looking at things like your electrolytic measures. They're looking
Yeah.
at glucose measures that don't necessarily completely map back to what you're seeing in primarily in circulation. And so the closest you have, that's why if you consider the Freestyle Libre as a wearable, it is from interstitial body fluid, which is still an insertion where you're doing a microneedle approach. So that is the challenge, and that's where we are in terms of our solution.
Is that an example of surrogate that Sriram talked about, or is that not a surrogate?
The choice of the glucose, is that a surrogate?
The
Is that
interstitial fluid.
Yes, so the tissue fluids are essentially, so in the context of systemic, for a systemic correlation, that is with what's happening in your blood. To that,
Blood.
if you take an interstitial body fluid, that would be a surrogate to which the sweat would be. So you do a two-level correlation. Vis-a-vis right now, we have got established that we don't need that ISF correlation. We can directly correlate between what you see systemically in your serum expression or blood expression to what you see in sweat. That's why it took us 7 years to prove out that truly what you're wearing and what you're seeing has value. Otherwise, it's just another lifestyle gimmick, which we don't want to be after.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you for sharing the information on how you correlate your results, your analysis with sweat, whereas and with blood and serum, and correlating that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So my next question is: wearables are widely used for monitoring COVID infections, post-COVID complication, and comorbidities. So it has a wide application. So what are the challenges with post-market surveillance of wearables to ensure patient safety? Sriram. Sriram, can you hear me? Yeah,
Okay.
sorry if I.
I was mute. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Um, so the post-market surveillance is actually it's actually a pretty important area, and people when they talk about FDA, they focus only on getting the certification and authorization, and they think that is the last hurdle, but that is not actually that is an important hurdle. But after that comes the post-market surveillance to make sure that the device is doing, or the medical device in this case, if you're looking at IVD. FDA is doing what it's supposed to do. Like say what you do what you say. And most medical device companies encounter obstacles because when they do the clinical trials, they do it with a smaller n number. And then when they get it out in the market, when you go to a very big population, you see other unintended consequences that they have not factored in. That can become a risk associated. And there are instances when FDA has challenged them and they have basically asked them to pull back that regulation to avoid that situation with respect to wearables. With wearables, the challenges that come into the front are about data management, patient safety. How do you protect the de-identified? How do you ensure that HIPAA is maintained and all the other regulations are maintained? From the other aspect here, is the diagnosis. Like if you're doing something that is the first of a kind, or something like what you Shalini said, a de novo, there is the predicate is not a direct predicate to it. Nothing exists in the market. And how do you do the correlation? When you do a clinical trial, you do a sample correlation and you do a sample analysis. So this is where, so there are two factors from it. One is uh, the efficacy of the measurement. What you're doing is what is accurate, what it is, and it is relatable to the standard of care. So as a part of post-market surveillance, you would want to continue doing a clinical observational clinical studies at a low level, capturing other use case, other conditions. Like here, if you're thinking about mental health, so we want to start with, let's say if we focus on anxiety disorder, we find that anxiety can be very different. So now you go and distribute it across people with different profiles, people with different demographics, people with different type of conditions, whether they are working, and this goes back to the circadian rhythm, or people with different situations. Or similarly, for the IBD use case, you're looking at people with, let's say you're looking at a particular community. We want to capture and make sure that no community is left. Like include diversity, include equity, include into your sample cohort. And a lot of this post-market surveillance studies doesn't have to wait until after the 510K. You can be, most people tend to be reactive, but you can also do proactive. So as a medical device manufacturer, especially if you're going after the regulated market space, one thing here is to be proactive in actually getting that understanding, de-risking it, doing a lot of characterization, doing a lot of data collection upfront, and it can be done in a cost-effective manner. This is where some companies have done it very well. I don't want to name those companies, but you can see them. Actually, some companies have done a very good job, even the wearable thing, and they have actually been able to establish that they can actually protect the patient safety, protect the patient privacy, and also be ensure that there is accuracy in the data. As Enlicense, our approach here is we are focused on IBD and mental health. For both of these, our intent here, as we are going into the product development phase of our platform, is to collect user adoption. So we want to participate with different clinics. We want to participate with different patient support groups, focused in those two areas. We want to have them try our product, give us the feedback, and actually we want to take the feedback and build and ensure that the device is factoring into account all these considerations. Some of them could be the user adaptability. Then there is the user ability to relate to the data. With respect to the technical aspect, the regulations, a lot of this HIPAA and the high-tech regulations have been very well defined in the FDA space. But is that sufficient? It is also evolving. If those regulations are also changing, it's not thing in stone. As different use cases, as they learn more, it's going to evolve. Our thing is, we want to do, there is going to be data transfer, there is going to be data handling. So we are looking, for us, we don't want to be the first movers there. We want to see what the wearables industries has adopted and tried and tested. We are pioneers in the sensor technology. We are not we don't want to be the pioneers in different type. So we are constantly evaluating different connectivity and methods of data handling that has been tried and tested, and we adopt the best known methods and constantly evolve and think. So this is the proactive way of saying, if there is something that's going to be tried and tested, that has been validated, use it. There is a reason why that has been tried and tested, and use it. So this goes back to the data exchange between the device and the app and the cloud, and we want to adopt there. From respect to the efficacy of the data, our focus here is to get as much diverse patient, and which is why we like this opportunity with this podcast, is we want to be able to get people to reach out and say, I would like to volunteer. I want to test out your device. I want to test. We are enrolling, and we want to basically collect this data. So these are our two methods of doing proactive readiness for the being ready for the post-market surveillance.
Absolutely, Sriram. And when you talked about you're a technologist, and when you talked about the actual data privacy, people are in today's world concerned about cybersecurity, number
Hmm.
one. And people are also then coming up with some solutions, and namely, those are blockchain, Internet of Things, and then a little bit of artificial intelligence. But mostly, uh, blockchain and Internet of Things are being proposed as ways of cybersecurity. Now, is there application of those technologies in wearables?
Absolutely, there is. So with 5G, that is going to be the next focus, and which is where the Internet of IoT is focused on. There is this whole communication protocol called ultra wideband, which is time of flight, which is focused on near data exchange. Like you could
Right,
basically, the first thing here is the Apple AirTag. That is the first deployment of that ultra wideband. Ultra wideband technology has been there from the 1970s, but it is until Apple really and a few other companies until 5G really came into is when it became into focus. Now, you juxtapose that with Bluetooth technology, which has been the current standard of or the status quo with respect to any data handling and so on. Now, Bluetooth has also been there, but there is going to be concerns of Bluetooth technology being intercepted, and there is a privacy concern out there.
right.
People take the necessary steps to protect it, and there are standards that are established, and this is where and these are pretty well defined standards, the technical standard, the Bluetooth. And over time, it has become more robust, more secure. Even class 3 medical devices, such as those that are getting embedded into the body, like neuromodulation and so on, also use
Right.
Bluetooth technology. It has improved significantly over the last decade.
You
Uh,
are meaning Bluetooth technology or blockchain technology? Sorry.
No, I'm saying Bluetooth. Blockchain is
Bluetooth.
something that is not yet, I have not seen it in medical yet. It's very,
Okay.
very new. Blockchain is
Okay.
something that is totally unregulated space, in
Right.
my
Right.
opinion.
Yes.
So today's current standard is Bluetooth. From Bluetooth, I see the opportunity for ultra wideband and
Right.
5G coming into the play. There are components, there are device providers who are actually working to refine and make sure that standards are very well protected.
Understood.
And there is some protection and privacy that could be. Blockchain is something that, as a medical device, I'm a little nervous. I would be nervous. That's my thing. Different people can have different opinion, but this is where I come. To me, uh, the medical device is one area where you don't risk. You play cautious.
Right.
Uh, this is informed risk taking. If you want to do something new, you don't go and say, "Oh, it is a new thing out there. Let me go try it." This is one area where you don't mess with in that
Right.
aspect because you're handling patients' data. That is, you need to value that.
Right. Good to hear from you on that, Sriram. As a CEO of License, that it just gives more trust for people to volunteer and raise our hand towards testing out and participating actively. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Sriram, for one is you are focusing on ensuring the quality of your data as well as you want to ensure data privacy and security adhering to HIPAA and high-tech regulation. Shalini, you have demonstrated the efficacy of your sweat platform for a wide range of biomarkers in sweat. Is it focused on a specific disease, or do you plan to expand for other physiological parameters in addition to chemical analytes?
So it's all about developing multimodal capability, right? Because that is where information is progressing for us to be able to make with using machine learning or make in the context of digital health, right? So this, if you think about this, this is one stream of data which we are
Yeah.
generating through our wearables. It can be very easily integrated with electrophysiological signals. It can be, and so on, with many other biometric recording data. So once the data set comes together, and I'm now envisioning a future beyond just using the wearable, then I think you have yourself a personal dashboard, very similar to our car dashboards, where you do see how these data sets come together. Now, as a user interfacing with this, or as a patient interfacing with it, I might really not understand what an elevation of various of the modes of data might mean. However, to the physician who can also see this, then in the context of your remote patient monitoring and telehealth, you have then the opportunity of making a better judgment or a better decision in terms of whatever the therapeutic intervention or the next level of diagnosis. This is the way we see that in the stream of development, we are now taking the first step. The next would be regulation. Post regulation, this is a data stream with other regulated data streams that are coming in, which can all be integrated. Now, we have shown it in an unregulated environment just from a technology standpoint. You can make it work with imaging data, you can make this work with other biometric data, and then you can develop these risk scores. So, our impact has always been we're looking at it as a chronic inflammatory response of the body. So that means you have many factors, right? Because our body is full of messenger molecules that's giving out messages all the time. I think of our body as like more complex than the internet streaming, right? So because they have all these cues that are coming through. So which is the cue that we have to pick up or pay attention to, right? And that's the strength of data. And truly a physician themselves don't know that, right? So there are certain known thresholds people look for, but now we open up the opportunities. And this is where that allow us to go truly remote, to access communities that we currently cannot access. So, and with the great connectivity that we have with the communications in Africa and in Asia, now this opportunity of incorporating wearables and also culturally understanding that where there is sometimes a resistance to doing even minimally invasive body procedures for monitoring, or the fear of going to a physician, or the lack of access to, you can improve maternal health, you can improve women's health, you can help improve child health, you can improve how we manage chronic diseases, right? So that is the future and that is the opportunity, all at costs that make it accessible and inclusive irrespective of which part of the globe we belong to. And that has truly been the challenge. And so now the transference is what, our ability to show we can measure many things is one step to this kind of rather global scope that this capability can have.
Thank
Thank
you. Picking
thank you.
up on the, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, Ashwin, please go ahead.
Okay. So picking up on the point, Shalini, you talked about inclusivity. When identifying volunteers, right, for clinical trials, FDA has placed a huge importance in diversity. How do you go about ensuring that number one, you have enough volunteers? That itself might be a challenge many times. Second thing is the volunteers are diverse.
True. You've highlighted a very important concern, right? So typically technologies, especially if you look at the last 30 years or 40 years and how you go and get a regulatory approval, you've tried to bias it to where you can see changes. And so these changes then can get reported, which means you're not really serving the entire demographic and you're not really being inclusive. Now, of course, the FDA is pushing this, the ability to do this using telehealth, the ability to do enrollment, recruitment, and then the idea that because this is a wearable or a non-invasive tech, you can actually distribute it significantly. For us, I'll take the example for our IBD disease indication. We have partnered with Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, who have been, in a sense, very helpful for us to understand the patient group, get access to them. And so when we design our pilot studies, which is what we have done through our initial to show efficacy of tech, right? So when you've done that, we've been focused towards looking at the populations where you're meeting the macroeconomic things of low and high income, where the disease is more prevalent versus others, people with different kinds of the kinds of cuisines that they consume or the food patterns that they have. All of this has an impact on that disease. So trying to get that profile captured, and then we have to scale that, right? So it's always challenging to get access to the patient. One, you have to do patient awareness, and two, you have to do patient empowerment and enablement, for which you have to partner with not-for-profits who reach those communities, who partner with those communities. And this is something we have spent a lot of time to build that trust and to build that partnership. That's why studies take longer, because if you have to do them right, then you have to reach those communities. And then in those communities, the understanding of the tech or the or anything new we are scared of, right? And this is true even with even using the next generation of the smartphone, right? We get scared, like, what can this do to us, right? So think about this. This is something that's measuring something about you and reporting that. So getting that. So this we have done in our IBD use case. In our stress use case, there's a lot more excitement to adopt, right? Because this now reaches a larger population, and especially when you think in age groups, the 18 to 24 age group is the group that is always wanting to try the next new thing. And so there you have a lot more your inroads you make to adaptation of these capabilities. But you're absolutely true. For regulation, we have to spend the time in building those relationships, which will allow us to reach the populations and put that extra effort in educating on the value. And then, you do this study in a manner that the data is as inclusive as you can make it, so that when you talk about efficacy and safety, you're not just talking and biasing it to that small subgroups. And that's kind of been our vision, and that's what we're working towards.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you for covering on how wearables can be harnessed for improving the number of volunteers as well as ensuring the diversity in clinical trials. So wearables are playing a crucial role in decentralized clinical research, as especially they are used as decentralized clinical elements. So do you plan, Sriram, do you plan to expand the use of your devices for decentralized clinical research?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is our this is the whole enablement part of it, like the whole patient reach out of it. Shalini touched on a few points of how we were able to connect and reach to IBD. Now, even stretching out, expanding on that too, we decided that we also need to look at cohorts in Europe, cohorts across, and so we are trying to build some. In fact, I'm going to start a study in Dublin in October, where we're looking at people with NAFLD and NASH, who with giving dietary interventions to see how our sensor platform can report and monitor and track their biomarker levels. We also have studies that we're looking at veterans in Virginia, where we're looking at people with liver cirrhosis, and some of them have PTSD. Some of them are suffering from mental health conditions. We are in discussions to start for specifically focusing on mental health, where we're looking at cortisol. We are looking at tracking people with those on the spectrum, because today people on the spectrum, as per syndrome or the autism spectrum, they go unattended. And for people on the spectrum, their ability to relate their stress or the state is not very clear. So when you look at this happy face, sad face, right, kind of thing, or their the way they interact with some of this app-based or the game-based applications may not be very similar to how a person not on the spectrum may interface. So this is where we are looking at how can we track their cortisol levels, so that the caregiver in this case, and most people on the spectrum need some type of support of other person, and can actually understand the trauma or that anxiety that is happening to them. And it can be muted and thing, right? We are talking to mental health experts to go partner and reach out. We want to go connect with things. So all of this requires a decentralized clinical trial type of thing and setup. So this whole the what FDA has done with opening telehealth and telemedicine and allowing for remote decentralized clinical trials as acceptable for the regulatory trial for the submission of 510K actually has benefited this. In fact, I think that is one of the things from the COVID. COVID actually opened up to say you can't do clinical trials in person, allow remote monitoring, allow remote tracking. And this whole remote patient monitoring system that is being set up, we think that will be the future. That is how it will eventually translate to. It also reduces the cost of doing the clinical trials. Because what most device manufacturers do is they work with a fixed budget. And they say, I have a certain cost for a clinical trial, but if I have to do an in-person trial, there is a human factor cost due to the nurse practitioner, the patient willing to the compliance, which significantly add up, right? By going to remote decentralized clinical trials, a lot of those cost items can be taken out, which means the rest of the money can be actually used to increase the N number. So now your bigger compliance, your bigger participation, your more diversity, your more equity, and your strength in N numbers, your strength of your analysis, your statistical strength is also more robust. And you can also now, if you're looking at companion diagnostic and you're saying, I am trying to look at a particular event. It's like one of the things when I heard in a recent event is the person is suffering from IBD, but the person is also undergoing stress because the person has been diagnosed with IBD and is going through a acceptance stage, which is negatively affecting their mental health. So how do you now do the interrelation between the two? If you get the person to the hospital and if you try to do a traditional clinical trial, you may actually cut out that person, right? And so now that the connection, the data is lost. But by doing remote decentralized clinical trial, you are now getting more adoption. So it is, yeah, so our platform is actually designed to work with remote decentralized clinical trials. It's absolutely, so this is how and wearables are the, will make it happen. And this is what we want to do.
That is excellent, Sriram, and it just talks about a new phase of clinical research and new phase of thinking to clinical medicine that wearables is bringing. Shalini, I have a question for you, a curious question. So we are uh, testing and detecting the cortisol levels, and everyone is probably having higher cortisol levels these days. So in few years, few decades down the line, is everyone going to wear a wearable?
So I think we all want to know what is happening to us, right? So that's the power that our first Fitbits or smartwatches have given that to us, right? So now we are very curious whether we have done enough amount of exercise for the day, that if we want
Yeah.
to cheat and have that little piece of cake, then that is okay, right? Because you've done this. But now,
Yeah.
but that is okay from a general physical well-being. And but when we think beyond that, and that's the question you're asking me, is our
Yes.
voice being represented in the choice of our wearable? And the answer to that is yes. Now, the next level is having this medical grade wearable, because truly we have to do prognostic monitoring. As a human being, all of us are going to be prone, and we will have some form of a chronic disease that is given as we have people living longer, and you're wanting to give them the quality of life so that they are self sufficient for longer periods of time. And it is true now, whether I'm in my 40s versus when I'm in my 80s, I want to be able to have the same kind of the ability to be self sufficient. So to give patient voice value there, so that what the ability to monitor ourselves, prognostically, that then drives input so that we can have these informed and engaging conversations with our healthcare provider, and to truly understand when we are given a list of things to say, okay, you have to take all these medication, what is the
Yes.
impact of that on us? Because most often the time that a physician sees us is about 9 minutes. 7 to 9 is what a general practitioner or a primary care does. And if you go into remote areas, or even like areas where access to public health is not there, then what is that? It's a minute if you're lucky, right? So, and you're generally carted out. So you'd feel now you're risking your entire well-being on something you don't understand. So how do we demystify what is very important to us, our own body? And that is where wearables will play an important role. It's not just for the biohacker or the young 18-year-old who wants to know what's happening or to get power performance out of their body, or this elite athlete. It is for all of us, who might be spending 8 to 10 hours a day in front of a computer trying to get
Right.
all our deadlines done, and then
Yes.
dealing with kids and dealing with perhaps
Life.
older parents and life in general, right? So voice is important, capturing the impact of a voice.
Right.
I suspect, Ashwin, that our basal cortisol levels are just going to go up. And even though we might have modulations, it's probably going to be trend. You look at previous generation to ours, we might be higher. Then who knows what our kids are going to look like, right? So, but maybe that's a good thing for us to know, because we might truly make those interventions early, that we will really understand it's all about integrated and holistic living,
Right.
and we
Yes.
can all live a happier and healthier life.
And some
And
cortisol
Sriram,
is actually good. Some cortisol level is good.
yeah, actually
Cortisol is
good. Yeah.
actually not a bad marker. So it's
Yeah.
not elevated as bad kind of thing. But what goes up needs to come down. So it's like balancing life. That is the
Yeah.
key thing. Is how do you balance work, life, everything, stress? That's what it comes
Right.
down to. Go
But
ahead, Ashwin.
Sriram, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry to cut you out there. But when you talked about the clinical trials, right, and we are talking about a new phase in clinical trials. But if everyone wears wearable, we can do clinical trials even better, right? If we have a new medicine, you are able to keep track of how the medicine works on population level, real time, every day.
Or the
Actually,
impact of a vaccine too,
coming back to
Ashwin.
vaccine,
So
correct?
how
No, no,
efficacious is the vaccine?
yeah, and so this goes back to, like, if you were to if you were doing drug discovery or molecule
Right.
discovery, and you want to test out whether there's a placebo effect or the molecule effect, right? Today, the the ability to have this wearable device, and which is where our focus is on chemical biomarkers, is because we can now measure the biomarkers for which that molecule or that particular drug is being applied for. And this is the whole introduction of biologics for chronic disease management is how the companion diagnostic value we see with our platform. So
Mhm.
with the decentralized trials and the ability to monitor in real time, like if you were to do a blood draw, it typically takes around 24 to 48 hours before the results come back, right? And you're only going to be able to do the blood draws, and most of these markers are laboratory markers, or if you're doing a stool sample, or if you're doing something, even cortisol, which is done in saliva as a standard of care, you have to now collect the saliva, which is FDA approved, and you have to send it to a lab, and the lab basically reports it in 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
It is not in real time. But your cortisol, which is more diurnal, probably could have spiked and gone down, or could have changed by the time your results came. Your mood expression changed completely. Real time monitoring, which is what wearables are optimally suited to respond. That is how the feedback. Even the pharma companies are investing and looking at digital health with a focus or emphasis on wearables. A lot of things are not very clear and understand it for a drug discovery aspect, but it is happening. We will see wearables being used for more and more drug discovery areas. So that eventually goes back to vaccines and how you want to develop new vaccines, because ultimately vaccines are the preventative measures. You
Correct.
want to know the initial feedback to develop the preventative measures. That is what I think, or we think, will be the drive.
Absolutely. Chris, um, This was a fantastic interview. We got to learn a lot about N-License and the great work Shalini and Sriram are doing. And to our viewers and listeners also, you should check out N-License and the great work they're doing in both the mental health arena with cortisol levels as well as the tracking of inflammatory markers as well. So over to you, Chris. To and again, Shalini and Sriram, we are extremely excited to have you on our show today. Thank you so much for your time.
We enjoyed it too. It was
Enjoyed it.
lovely talking to both of you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shalini and Sriram. First, congratulations on your astounding research, and thank you so much for your time. So thank you. So the speaker for our next session on October 8th is Dr. Vibha Java. Dr. Vibha is an executive director at Bristol Myers. She is an immunologist with 20 plus years of experience in biotechnology and biopharma companies. She has an experience in end-to-end development of biologics, from early protein engineering to late-stage process development and filing for approval. So please stay tuned. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shalini, Sriram, and Ashwin. See you all.
Thank you. And